Hey guys, it's Gideon. Today we're going to talk about some Ashes of Creation news, which seems weird to say. Before we jump in, just a quick disclaimer. I have no affiliation with anyone who's involved in any of the litigation with Intrepid and Ashes and TFE and whoever all the parties are. I just saw news on Discord in the official Ashes Discord, which I haven't left just for this exact reason. If something comes up, we haven't heard anything in months. So just sharing this for pure entertainment and just to update you guys on some news. Nothing more, nothing less. So diving right in, Steven Sharif just posted his first major public update in a few months about the ongoing legal battle surrounding Intrepid Studios and Ashes of Creation. And there are some pretty significant developments here. Now, before I get into this, I want to be careful with the language I use. A lot of what Steven shared includes allegations against former Intrepid board members and other parties involved in the lawsuit. So when I talk about claims of misconduct, improper debt, or attempts to take control of assets, those are Steven's allegations unless I specifically say the court made a finding. With that said, here's what happened. According to Steven, his federal lawsuit has now become a pretty massive legal proceeding with nearly 200 docket entries and thousands of pages of filings and exhibits over the last 6 months. But the biggest development is what happened at the most recent hearing. Steven asked the court to appoint a neutral party to protect and preserve Intrepid's intellectual property and other assets while this case continues, and the judge granted that request. So based on Steven's update, important technical assets related to Ashes of Creation, including the game's codebase, are being placed into neutral, court-supervised custody rather than simply being handed over to Steven, the former board, or Intrepid directly. And I think that is probably the single biggest takeaway from this entire update. The Ashes of Creation codebase is essentially being put into a court-controlled safe while the larger fight over ownership and control continues. There's also another major issue the court is going to look at, and that is the debt that was allegedly used as the basis for the foreclosure of Intrepid Studios. Steven alleges that this secured debt was improperly placed on Intrepid by members of the former board as part of an effort to eventually foreclose on the company and take control of its assets. The defendants apparently submitted hundreds of pages of documentation supporting their position that this debt is legitimate, but according to Steven, the court still believes there are enough unanswered questions surrounding that debt that an independent person will now be appointed to examine it. The two sides have until August 25th to try to agree on who that person will be, and if they can't, the court will make the appointment. Steven also says there were attempts to gain control of several other Ashes-related assets. That includes things like the official Discord, Reddit, YouTube, and X accounts, as well as the Ashes of Creation domain. According to Steven, those requests were not granted. He says the court also did not grant the former board direct access to the game codebase and the systems where the code is stored. Instead, Steven asked for those assets to go to a neutral custodian, and that is what the judge agreed to do. Steven also used this update to issue a pretty direct warning to publishers, investors, contractors, and other companies that may be talking with the former board or related entities about Ashes of Creation. His position is that the ownership and authority surrounding some of these assets is still actively disputed in federal court. So his message is basically, do not assume that somebody showing you the code, presenting an investment opportunity, or claiming they have the right to sell or license Ashes assets actually has clear authority to do so. He also specifically asked third-party developers and contractors who may have had access to the Ashes codebase to preserve records, access logs, and communications, and not copy or distribute anything unless they know that access is authorized through the court-supervised process. Now, Steven obviously uses some very strong language throughout this statement. He alleges that former board members acted improperly, that the foreclosure was unlawful, and that their actions ultimately led to the destruction of Intrepid Studios and the loss of jobs for its employees. Those are serious allegations, and this litigation is still ongoing. So none of that should be treated as final determination of what happened. But what we do know from Steven's update is that the court has now stepped in to place important technical assets into neutral custody, and to independently examine some of the underlying issues surrounding the disputed debt. And then, toward the end of the message, Steven gets a lot more personal. He talks about how difficult this whole situation has been, not just for him, but for the developers who spent years working on Ashes, their families, and obviously all of us who have followed and supported this game for such a long time. And he makes it very clear that, at least from his perspective, he still believes that Ashes of Creation deserves a future. He says he intends to continue fighting for that future and that he'll provide additional updates whenever there are meaningful developments in the case. So where does that leave us? I think the most important thing here is that Ashes of Creation is not simply disappearing into somebody's hands behind closed doors. At least for now, some of the game's most important assets are being placed under neutral court supervision while these ownership disputes are worked out. That doesn't mean Ashes is coming back tomorrow, obviously. It doesn't mean Steven has won the lawsuit either, obviously. And it definitely doesn't mean we know what the final outcome is going to be. But it does mean the story of Ashes of Creation is still very much alive. And after everything that has happened over the last several months, that alone is a pretty significant development. So in closing, do I think this news means that we're going to see the game take on its namesake and rise from the ashes to live again? I think that's pretty unlikely. I do find it interesting that this fight is ongoing very passionately, and hopefully me sharing this update with you as dispassionately as I could was useful or interesting in some way. Once again, just sharing it for entertainment and informational purposes without trying to, pick a side, obviously one way or the other. However, that said, I would love to continue the conversation in the comments with you guys. And as always, until the next one, peace.